The canvas before Nora Bellamy held mountains she had conjured from pure imagination, painted in shades of purple and gold that existed only in her mind, while outside her tiny room in Hill City, South Dakota, the real world remained stubbornly out of reach. It was 1881, and Nora had lived all 22 years of her life within a radius of perhaps 5 miles from the boarding house, where she rented a cramped corner room on the second floor. Her father had been a clerk who died when she was 12, her mother a washerwoman who followed him to the grave 3 years later, leaving Nora with nothing but a tin of brushes, some old paints, and an inexplicable talent for capturing places she had never seen. She supported herself by painting signs for the various establishments along Main Street, but in her spare hours, she created landscapes that seemed to breathe with life, vistas of canyons and deserts and mountain ranges that existed somewhere out in the great American West, places she knew only from the stories of travelers and the occasional photograph she glimpsed in the general store. The boarding house proprietor, Mrs. Henderson, had allowed Nora to display some of her paintings in the front parlor, where they caught the afternoon light and drew occasional comments from the transient workers and cowboys who rented rooms by the week. Most men ignored them entirely, but every so often someone would pause and study the brushstrokes with genuine interest. That was how Mitchell Barnes first saw her work. He had ridden into Hill City on a dusty Wednesday afternoon in late September, his horse tired and his saddlebags nearly empty, looking for a place to rest before continuing north toward Deadwood. The Black Hills region was still relatively wild, still scarred by the recent gold rush that had brought thousands of prospectors and opportunists flooding into Dakota territory, leading to conflicts and the eventual forced relocation of the tribes. Mitchell had worked as a ranch hand, a trail guide, and occasionally as a scout, moving from place to place as work demanded, never settling anywhere long enough to call it home. He was 26 years old, lean and weathered from years of sun and wind, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and gray eyes that had seen more country than most men would in 3 lifetimes. He had guided wagon trains through mountain passes, helped drive cattle across Kansas prairies, and once spent an entire winter trapping in the Rockies. The West was his home in a way that no single town could ever be. When he stepped into the boarding house parlor to inquire about a room, his attention was immediately drawn to the painting hanging above the fireplace. It depicted a canyon at sunset, with layered rock formations in shades of red and orange, shadows falling deep into crevices that suggested vast depths. The sky above glowed with the particular quality of light that came just before darkness, when the world seemed suspended between day and night. "That is the damnedest thing," he said aloud, forgetting himself. Mrs. Henderson looked up from her ledger with a disapproving frown at his language, but softened when she saw him genuinely absorbed in the painting. "Pretty, is it not? One of my tenants painted that. She does all kinds of landscapes." "Where is this place?" Mitchell asked, stepping closer to examine the details. "I cannot say. You would have to ask Miss Bellamy, though I suspect she made it up out of her own head as she does with most of them." Mitchell turned to look at the older woman. "She painted this without ever seeing it. She has hardly left Hill City her entire life, poor dear. Her parents died young, and she has been on her own ever since, but she has quite the imagination, I must say." Something about that struck Mitchell as profoundly sad and strangely compelling at the same time. Here was someone who could create such vivid, accurate depictions of places she had never been, capturing not just the visual elements, but somehow the feeling of those places, the sense of scale and solitude that came with the real thing. He had stood in canyons that looked remarkably similar to the one in the painting, had watched that exact quality of sunset light play across rock faces in New Mexico and Arizona. "Is she here now?" he asked. "Likely in her room, working on another painting." "Second floor, last door on the right, though I am not sure it is proper for a gentleman to call on a young lady unaccompanied." Mitchell smiled slightly. "I just want to ask her about the painting, madam. Nothing improper." Mrs. Henderson gave him a long, assessing look, then nodded. "You seem decent enough, but I will be listening from down here, mind you." He climbed the narrow stairs, his boots creaking on the worn wood, and found the door she had indicated. Light showed under the gap at the bottom, and he could smell linseed oil and turpentine. He knocked gently. "Mrs. Henderson, I already paid for the week," a woman's voice called from inside, sounding distracted. "It is not Mrs. Henderson," Mitchell said. "My name is Mitchell Barnes. I am a new tenant, and I wanted to ask you about your painting downstairs." There was a long pause, then the sound of footsteps. The door opened partway, and a young woman peered out at him with startling blue eyes set in a paint-smudged face. She had light brown hair pinned up haphazardly, and she wore a simple cotton dress protected by a stained apron. In her hand, she held a brush still loaded with paint. "My painting?" she asked, clearly surprised. "The canyon at sunset. I have been to places that look just like that down in New Mexico territory. It is remarkable that you captured it so well without ever seeing it." Her expression shifted from wariness to something like hunger, a desperate curiosity that made her seem suddenly vulnerable. "You have really been there, to places like that, and hundreds of others." "I have been traveling the West for nearly 10 years now, working various jobs, seeing country most people only read about in dime novels." Nora opened the door wider, seemingly forgetting propriety in her eagerness. "What is it like? I mean, truly like. Not just what it looks like, but what it feels like to stand in those places." Mitchell found himself searching for words, something he rarely had trouble with. There was something about her intensity, the way she looked at him as though he held the answers to questions she had been asking her entire life, that made him want to give her a worthy response. "It feels like being at the edge of the world," he said finally. "Like you are standing in a place so big and so old that you are just a brief moment passing through. The silence out there is different than silence in towns. It is full of small sounds, wind and birds and the creak of stone cooling after sunset. And the colors are exactly what you painted, those layers of red and orange and purple. You got it right somehow." She stared at him for a long moment, and he saw tears gathering in her eyes, though she blinked them back quickly. "I have always wondered if I was even close. I paint from descriptions I read or stories I hear from travelers, and from photographs when I can find them, but I never know if I am capturing the truth of it." "You are," he assured her. "That is what struck me so hard when I saw it. You are painting the truth." "Miss Bellamy, is everything all right up there?" Mrs. Henderson's voice floated up the stairwell. Nora stepped back slightly, suddenly remembering herself. "Yes, Mrs. Henderson. Mr. Barnes was just asking about my paintings." "Well, doors stay open, please." Nora blushed, but left the door ajar as Mitchell had not moved to close it anyway. "Would you like to see the others?" she asked quietly. "I have quite a few." "I would like that very much." She led him into her small room, which was crowded with canvases in various stages of completion. They leaned against every wall, stacked 3 and 4 deep in places. Mitchell moved slowly through the space, studying each one. Here was a desert scene with saguaro cacti and distant mesas. There was a mountain valley with aspen groves painted in autumn gold. Another showed a wide prairie under an enormous sky, the grass seeming to ripple with wind. "You have painted the Sangre de Cristo Range," he said, pointing to one canvas. "And this looks like the Chihuahuan Desert. This one could be Wyoming territory up near the Tetons. Are they accurate?" Nora asked, hovering near his elbow, anxious and hopeful. "Remarkably so. Some of these could be specific places I have been. Others are more general, but the feeling is right, the sense of each region. How do you do this without seeing them?" She shrugged, looking embarrassed. "I do not know. I read everything I can find about the West. I talk to travelers and ask them detailed questions. I study photographs and maps, and then I try to imagine what it would be like to stand there, to see it with my own eyes. What the light would do, how the shadows would fall. It is like dreaming in a way, except I am awake and I have a brush in my hand." Mitchell found himself deeply moved by this. Here was someone who had been confined to one small corner of the world through circumstances beyond her control. Yet she had developed the ability to travel in her imagination, to see and capture places she had never been. And now here he was, someone who had seen all those places but had never thought to capture them, never thought there was anything permanent about his wandering life. "Would you like to see them?" he asked impulsively. "The real places, I mean." Nora's eyes widened. "What?" "Would you like to see the real places you have been painting? I could take you. I know the trails and the routes. I have contacts in various territories. We could travel safely." "I cannot possibly," she said automatically, though her voice was full of longing. "I have no money for travel. I barely manage my rent and supplies as it is. What if you could sell your paintings along the way? I have seen art fetch good prices in the mining towns and cattle towns. People are hungry for beauty out there, for something to remind them of home or to show them what the land looks like beyond their own horizons. And if you are painting from real places, from direct observation, they would be even better. You are suggesting I just pack up and leave. Travel alone with a man I met 10 minutes ago." Mitchell recognized the improbability of it even as the idea was forming. "I know how it sounds, but I give you my word I would conduct myself honorably. We could arrange proper accommodations wherever possible, separate rooms. I have a reputation as a reliable guide. I could provide references if you wanted to check." Nora turned away from him, wrapping her arms around herself. He could see her trembling slightly, whether from excitement or fear he could not tell. "Why would you do this? What would you gain from it?" That was a fair question, and Mitchell considered it carefully before answering. "Honestly, I think it would be extraordinary to see those places again through your eyes, to watch you experience them for the first time. I have been wandering for so long without purpose, just drifting from one job to the next. This would be a purpose, a reason to travel that is about something more than just survival or wages." "I would need time to think about it," Nora said, though he could hear in her voice that she was already half convinced. "I am staying here for at least a week," Mitchell said. "Think about it. Ask Mrs. Henderson about me if you want. Look at maps and decide where you would most want to go. And if you decide no, I will respect that and continue on my way." He left her then, returning to his room down the hall, and spent the rest of the day wondering if he had lost his mind. He had never made such an impulsive offer to anyone. He was a solitary man by nature, used to his own company, not given to romantic notions or grand gestures. But something about Nora Bellamy and her imaginary landscapes had struck a chord deep within him, had awakened something he had not known was sleeping. That evening at dinner, served family style in the boarding house dining room, he was acutely aware of Nora sitting 3 seats down from him. She had cleaned the paint from her face and changed into a fresh dress, her hair properly pinned now. She barely looked at him during the meal, but he caught her glancing his way several times when she thought he was not watching, Over the next few days, he made a point of being visible around the boarding house without being intrusive. He helped Mrs. Henderson repair a loose board on the front porch. He shared stories of his travels with the other boarders over evening meals, carefully including details about landscapes and natural wonders, rather than just the rough and tumble adventures that usually dominated such tales. He noticed Nora listening intently, though she rarely spoke. On the fourth day, she approached him on the porch where he was oiling his saddle. "If I were to consider your offer," she said without preamble, "where would we go first?" Mitchell looked up at her, his heart unexpectedly quickening. "Where would you most want to go?" She pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket and handed it to him. It was a list, written in neat handwriting, of locations. Badlands of Dakota Territory, Devil's Tower, the Grand Tetons, Yellowstone, Colorado Rockies, Santa Fe, Canyon de Chelly, the Painted Desert. "This is ambitious," he said, studying the list. "This would take months, maybe a year or more depending on weather and conditions. I know it is too much to ask." "I did not say that." He looked up at her. "I said it is ambitious, not impossible, but it would require planning, and you would need to be certain you want to do this. Once we are out there, there is no easy way back until we reach the next town or settlement." "I am certain," Nora said, and there was steel in her voice now. "I have been trapped in this town my entire life, dreaming of these places, painting them like a kind of prayer or wish. If there is even a chance I could see them for real, I have to take it. I am 22 years old, I have no family, no ties keeping me here. If I do not do this now, I will spend the rest of my life wondering what if." Mitchell nodded slowly. "Then we will do it, but we need to prepare properly. You will need appropriate clothing for riding and rough travel. We will need a second horse and supplies. I have some money saved, but we will need to earn more along the way. I can sell my paintings, and I can work, doing signs or portraits in the towns we pass through. Then we have a plan." He stood up and extended his hand to her, formal, sealing the agreement. "Partners in this journey." She took his hand, and he felt calluses on her fingers from years of gripping paintbrushes. "Partners," she agreed, Mrs. Henderson was scandalized, as they both expected, but Nora was of legal age and had no guardians to forbid her. The older woman did extract promises from Mitchell regarding Nora's safety and proper treatment, which he gave sincerely. Some of the other boarders whispered and speculated, but there were a few who looked at Nora with something like envy, wishing perhaps that they too had the courage to chase their own dreams beyond the familiar streets of Hill City. They spent a week preparing. Mitchell purchased a gentle mare for Nora and a pack mule to carry supplies. Nora sold several of her larger paintings to travelers passing through, enough to buy practical traveling clothes. Split skirts suitable for riding, sturdy boots, a wide-brimmed hat, and a warm coat for mountain weather. She packed her remaining paints and brushes carefully in oilcloth, along with folded canvases and a portable easel Mitchell fashioned from lightweight wood. On a cool October morning, with frost still glittering on the grass, they rode out of Hill City heading west. Nora turned back once to look at the town, the only home she had ever known, and Mitchell saw both fear and determination in her profile. Then she faced forward and did not look back again. The first days of travel were hard on her. She was not an experienced rider, and her muscles ached from hours in the saddle. Mitchell kept their pace moderate and stopped frequently to rest. He taught her how to care for her horse, how to read the landscape for water sources, how to set up a proper camp. At night, they slept on opposite sides of the fire, maintaining respectful distance, though Mitchell found himself increasingly aware of her presence, the sound of her breathing in the darkness, the way firelight caught in her hair. Their first destination was the Badlands, only a few days' ride from Hill City. As they approached the strange, eroded landscape of layered rock formations and sharp pinnacles, Nora gasped audibly. "Oh," she breathed. "Oh, I've tried to paint this, but I got it all wrong." Mitchell watched her face instead of the landscape, seeing wonder transform her features. "How did you get it wrong?" "The scale. I could never imagine how vast it is, how the formations go on and on toward the horizon. And the colors are different than I thought, more subtle. There are pinks and grays I never included. And the shadows, the way they define each ridge and valley. I need to paint this. Can we stop?" They made camp at a spot overlooking a particularly dramatic section of the Badlands. While Mitchell set up their tent and prepared a meal, Nora set up her easel with trembling hands and began to paint. She worked with fierce concentration, mixing colors on her palette, applying paint with quick, confident strokes. Mitchell found himself mesmerized by the process, the way she translated what she saw into something captured on canvas. She painted until the light failed, then sat back with a sigh that seemed to come from deep within her soul. "It is not finished, but it is a start. Can I see?" She nodded, and he came to stand behind her, looking over her shoulder at the canvas. Even incomplete, it was stunning. She had captured the strange, otherworldly quality of the place, the sense of ancient time made visible in stone. "That is extraordinary," he said quietly. "Being here makes all the difference. Actually seeing it, feeling the wind, smelling the sage. I was painting with my imagination before. Now I am painting with my whole self." That night, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Nora asked him about his life, where he had grown up, how he had come to his wandering ways. "I was raised on a farm in Missouri," Mitchell said, staring into the flames. "My family name is Barnes. We had good land, crops, and livestock. My father expected I would take over the farm eventually, marry a local girl, raise a family in the same house where I was born. But I always felt like I was suffocating there. The same fields year after year, the same roads, the same people. When I was 18, I left. Just packed a bag and headed west to see what was out there. Did your family forgive you? My father died before I could make peace with him. My mother writes to me occasionally, letters forwarded through various towns. She says she understands, but I am not sure she does. My younger brother took over the farm, and he is happy there. He fits that life in a way I never did. Do you ever regret leaving?" Mitchell considered this. "Sometimes I regret the pain it caused, but I do not regret the leaving itself. I needed to know what was beyond those Missouri fields. I needed to see the mountains and deserts and everything in between. What about you? Do you regret leaving Hill City?" Nora laughed softly. "I have only been gone a few days, but no, I do not regret it for a moment. Even if we turned back tomorrow, I would have these days of travel and the Badlands. That is more than I had a week ago." They stayed in the Badlands region for several more days while Nora completed multiple paintings. Mitchell used the time to hunt, bringing back rabbits and prairie birds that supplemented their supplies. He found himself content in a way he rarely experienced, enjoying the rhythm of making camp, watching Nora paint, sharing meals and conversation as the sun set over the strange landscape. One evening, as they were cleaning up after dinner, Nora suddenly asked, "Why are you not married, Mitchell? A man like you, capable and decent, I would think women would have taken notice." He was quiet for a long moment, caught off guard by the question. "I suppose because I have never stayed anywhere long enough to build that kind of connection. And the women in the places I have been, the respectable ones anyway, they want a man who will stay put, who will build a home and put down roots. I have never been that man. Never wanted to be." "Not until recently," he said, then caught himself, realizing what he had revealed. He glanced at her and found her watching him with an expression he could not quite read. "I have never been courted," Nora said quietly. "I have always been too poor, too independent, too strange with my painting obsession. The men in Hill City wanted women who would keep house and raise children and not ask for anything beyond that small life. I could never be that woman. Any man who wanted you to be less than you are would be a fool." She met his eyes across the fire, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of the growing connection that neither of them had spoken aloud yet. They moved on from the Badlands, heading northwest toward Devil's Tower. The weather grew colder as October advanced, and they stopped to purchase warmer supplies in a small town along the way. Nora sold 2 paintings to a saloon owner who hung them on his walls with pride, and a portrait sketch she did of the town blacksmith's wife earned them enough for a hot meal and a night in a real bed at the local inn. Mitchell insisted on separate rooms, maintaining his promise of propriety, though he found himself thinking about her in the room down the hall, wondering if she was sketching by lamplight or already asleep. He was falling in love with her, he realized. It had happened so gradually he had not noticed the progression, but now it was undeniable. The way she looked at the landscape with such hungry appreciation, the way she spoke about light and color and the feeling of a place, the way she was so completely herself without apology or artifice. When they reached Devil's Tower, rising improbably from the surrounding landscape like a massive tree stump carved by giants, Nora actually cried. She stood staring up at it, tears streaming down her face, and Mitchell moved to stand beside her, not touching but close enough that she could feel his presence. "I never imagined," she whispered. "How could I have imagined something like this?" They camped at the base of the tower for a week. Nora painted it from every angle in every light. Mitchell climbed partway up its sides, marveling at the columnar structure of the rock. In the evenings, they talked more freely now, the conversation ranging from philosophy to silly anecdotes from their childhoods. Nora told him about learning to paint from her father, who had been an amateur artist before life's necessities forced him into clerk work. Mitchell told her about the time he had been treed by a bear in Colorado, forced to spend an entire night in the branches while the bear waited below. "Were you terrified?" she asked. "Terrified and furious at myself for being careless," he admitted. "But also, once I accepted the situation, I spent that night watching the stars and listening to the forest, and there was something almost peaceful about it. The bear left at dawn, and I climbed down and went on my way." "You are different than other men I have known," Nora said. "How so?" "You are comfortable with stillness. Most men I knew in Hill City seemed always to be fighting against something, angry at their lives or at the world. You have a kind of peace about you, even when you are moving from place to place. I have been thinking lately that maybe the moving from place to place was me looking for something without knowing what it was." "Have you found it?" she asked softly. He looked at her in the firelight, her face smudged with paint as usual, her eyes reflecting the flames. "I think I might have." Neither of them pushed the conversation further that night, but something had been acknowledged, a truth placed gently between them to be examined and considered. They continued northwest into Montana Territory, heading for the Grand Tetons and Yellowstone. The journey grew more challenging as they climbed into mountain country. Snow began to fall in early November, light dustings at first, then heavier storms that forced them to take shelter and wait out the weather. They found hospitality with a ranching family near the Yellowstone River, trading work for food and lodging while a blizzard raged outside. The rancher's wife was fascinated by Nora's paintings and commissioned a portrait of her family, which Nora completed over the course of 3 days. Mitchell helped the rancher repair fencing and move livestock to winter pastures. At night, the whole family gathered around the fire, and there was something achingly domestic about it that made Mitchell think about permanence for the first time in years. When the weather cleared, they thanked their hosts and continued on. But something had shifted between Mitchell and Nora. They rode closer together now, and when they made camp, they sat nearer to each other by the fire. Small touches became common, a hand on her elbow to help her dismount, her fingers brushing his when she handed him coffee in the morning. The Grand Tetons rose before them like a wall of stone and snow, impossibly massive, impossibly beautiful. Nora wept again, and this time Mitchell did not hesitate. He pulled her into his arms and held her while she cried against his chest, overwhelmed by the majesty of what she was witnessing. "Thank you," she said when she finally pulled back, not quite meeting his eyes. "Thank you for bringing me here. Thank you for understanding why this matters so much. You do not need to thank me. This journey has been as much for me as for you." They found a sheltered valley with a view of the mountains and made camp for several weeks. Winter was settling in earnest now, and they both knew they could not continue much further north before they would be trapped by snow. Nora painted obsessively, trying to capture the mountains in all their grandeur. Mitchell hunted and fished, keeping them supplied with fresh meat. They fell into a routine that felt almost like married life, though they still maintained separate sleeping arrangements and had not spoken openly about their feelings. One night, a severe storm rolled in with almost no warning. The wind howled and the temperature dropped dramatically. Mitchell woke to find snow blowing into the tent and the fire nearly out. He rekindled the flames and secured the tent better, but he could hear Nora shivering in her bedroll across the tent. "Nora, you need to move closer to the fire," he called over the wind. "I am fine," she called back, though her teeth were chattering. He made a decision and moved to her side, bringing his own bedroll. "We need to share warmth. This is not about propriety, this is about survival. Is that all right?" She nodded, and he arranged their bedrolls together, then lay down beside her and pulled both blankets over them. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, sharing his body heat. She was indeed freezing, shaking uncontrollably. "Why did you not say you were this cold?" he asked, rubbing her arms briskly to generate warmth. "Did not want to be a burden," she managed through chattering teeth. "You are not a burden. You are, well, you are everything, Nora. Do you not know that by now?" She turned in his arms so she was facing him, and even in the darkness of the tent he could see her eyes searching his face. "Say that again." "You are everything," he repeated, meaning it with his whole heart. "I love you. I think I have loved you since I saw that first painting in the boarding house, but I know I love you now, completely and certainly. I love your passion for beauty and your courage in chasing your dreams and the way you see the world as something endlessly worth capturing on canvas. I love you." "Mitchell," she breathed, and then she kissed him. It was cold and awkward at first, two people bundled in blankets, still shivering from the chill, but it quickly became warm and right. He kissed her back with all the longing he had been restraining for weeks, and she responded with equal fervor. They did not take it further than kissing that night, both of them still mindful of propriety and the seriousness of such a step. But they held each other through the storm, whispering declarations and promises, until they fell asleep tangled together. In the morning, the world was transformed by snow, everything clean and white and glittering. They emerged from the tent to find they had weathered the storm safely. Mitchell built up the fire while Nora made coffee, and they sat together wrapped in a shared blanket, her head on his shoulder. "We should get married," Mitchell said abruptly. "I know this is fast, and I know I am supposed to court you properly and ask your family for permission, but you have no family and we are in the middle of the wilderness. But I want to marry you, Nora. I want to spend my life showing you all the beautiful places in the world and watching you paint them. I want to build a home somewhere and fill it with your art and our children. I want everything with you." Nora tilted her head up to look at him, her blue eyes bright with tears and joy. "Yes. Yes, I want all of that too. I love you, Mitchell. I want to marry you." They found a small town called Bozeman, Montana Territory, about a week's ride from their camp. It had a proper church and a circuit preacher who happened to be in town. They were married in a simple ceremony with the preacher's wife and the general store owner as witnesses. Nora wore the nicest dress she had with her, and Mitchell had cleaned up as best he could. They exchanged simple gold bands purchased from the general store, and when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Mitchell kissed his bride with a happiness he had never imagined possible. They spent their wedding night in a room at the town's small hotel, and Nora came to him with nervous eagerness. He was gentle with her, patient and reverent, and when they finally came together, it felt like the most natural and right thing in the world. Afterward, she lay in his arms and whispered, "I never knew I could feel like this. Happy and safe and like I am exactly where I am supposed to be." "That is how you make me feel too," he told her, stroking her hair, "like I have been wandering toward you my whole life without knowing it." They stayed in Bozeman for a month, taking a small room and working to earn money for the rest of their journey. Mitchell signed on with a lumber company doing short-term work, and Nora did portrait paintings of several families in town. The money was good, and it allowed them to replenish their supplies and save a bit extra. But more than that, it gave them time to settle into married life, to learn each other's rhythms and habits, to be simply happy together. When spring began to hint at its arrival, they headed south toward Yellowstone. The geyser fields left Nora speechless with awe. She tried to paint Old Faithful as it erupted, attempting to capture the column of water and steam against the sky, but she ended up laughing in frustration. "Some things are beyond painting," she admitted. "Some things you just have to witness and hold in your memory." They saw mud pots and hot springs in impossible colors, herds of bison that stretched across valleys, and wildlife that showed little fear of humans. Mitchell felt like they were traveling through a fairy tale land, everything strange and wondrous. They met other travelers, trappers and prospectors and adventurers, and Nora sketched many of them, building a collection of character studies that captured the rough, hardy people who inhabited these wild places. As summer approached, they continued south into Wyoming Territory and then Colorado. In Denver, which was rapidly growing into a proper city, Nora held an exhibition of her landscape paintings. Mitchell had printed handbills and spread word of the showing. To their amazement, nearly every painting sold, some for prices that made them both dizzy. A banker purchased the Grand Tetons painting for his office. A mining magnate bought 3 desert scenes. A woman whose husband had died prospecting in the mountains bought a painting of an aspen grove because it reminded her of where she had last been happy. With money in their pockets and time before them, they explored the Colorado Rockies thoroughly. Nora painted Pikes Peak and the Garden of the Gods. They ventured into old mining camps where Mitchell's skills were sometimes needed for short-term work. Nora did portraits of miners and their families, capturing the weathered faces and hard-won dignity of people making their living from the stubborn earth. In a town called Leadville, high in the mountains, they received word that Nora was pregnant. The doctor, an old man who had seen everything the frontier could offer, confirmed it with a smile. "Baby should come early winter, I would say. You two planning to settle, or are you still wandering?" Mitchell looked at Nora, the question unspoken between them. They had talked about settling down eventually, but had not decided when or where. "We have a few months yet," Nora said. "We would like to see New Mexico territory first if we can do so safely." The doctor nodded. "Should be fine if you take it easy. But you will want to be settled somewhere before the baby comes. No traveling with a newborn in winter." They made their way south through Colorado and into New Mexico territory, taking their time now, mindful of Nora's condition. She was not sick, but she tired more easily, and Mitchell insisted on frequent rest stops. They reached Santa Fe in late summer, and the adobe buildings and clear light of the high desert enchanted them both. Nora painted constantly, capturing the unique architecture and landscape. They visited Canyon de Chelly, and the ancient cliff dwellings moved them both to silence. Standing in the ruins where the ancestral Pueblones had lived centuries before, Mitchell felt the weight of history, the long story of people living in and loving this harsh, beautiful land. "Our child will be born into this world," Nora said softly, one hand on her growing belly. "This wild, magnificent world. What a gift that is." They painted and worked their way west to the Painted Desert, arriving in September as the air began to cool slightly. The colors there were beyond anything Nora had imagined, layers and bands of red, orange, purple, and white stretching to the horizon. She painted for days, trying to capture the otherworldly beauty of it. But they both knew their traveling time was ending. Nora was 6 months pregnant now, and they needed to find a place to settle at least for a while. They discussed their options at night, lying together under immense desert stars. "I have been thinking," Mitchell said carefully. "What if we went back to Hill City? Not to stay forever, but to have the baby there, where there are people who know you, where Mrs. Henderson and the doctor could help. It would be safer than trying to make do out here, or in some strange town where we have no connections." Nora was quiet for a while, considering. "I thought I would never want to go back. But that was before I left, before I saw all the places I dreamed of. Going back now would be different. It would be a choice, not a cage. And you are right that it would be safer for the baby. After the baby is born, after you have recovered and the child is old enough, we could travel again. This does not have to be the end of our adventures." She smiled and took his hand, placing it on her belly where he could feel the baby moving. "Our adventures are just beginning. They are just different adventures now." They began the long journey back north, traveling slowly and carefully. Nora was heavy with child now, uncomfortable on horseback, but she bore it with good humor. They stopped frequently in towns along the way where Nora sold paintings and did sketches. The money was good, and they saved it carefully, knowing they would need to support themselves and their baby. They reached Hill City in mid-October, just as the leaves were turning. Mrs. Henderson was shocked and delighted to see them, doubly so when she noticed Nora's obvious pregnancy. She fussed over them both, insisting they take the best room in the boarding house and refusing payment. "You are like family, dear girl," she said, tears in her eyes. "I worried so much after you left, but I can see it was the making of you. Look at you, so happy and healthy and about to be a mother." The town doctor, who had known Nora since childhood, examined her and pronounced both mother and baby healthy. "Another month or so, I would say. You made it back just in time." Mitchell found work at a nearby ranch for the winter, riding out each day and returning each evening to their room where Nora was preparing for the baby's arrival. She sewed small clothes and blankets, and she painted smaller pieces now, domestic scenes and portraits that she could complete while sitting down. Their son was born on a cold November night, after a long but relatively uncomplicated labor. Mitchell held Nora's hand through it all, and when the doctor finally placed the squalling infant in his arms, he wept openly. The baby was perfect, tiny and red-faced and healthy, with a surprising amount of dark hair. "We are naming him after my father," Mitchell said, looking down at his son with wonder. "Matthew Barnes, if that is all right with you." "Matthew," Nora repeated, reaching up to touch the baby's tiny hand. "It is perfect. Hello, Matthew. Welcome to the world, little one." The winter passed in a blur of sleepless nights and overwhelming love. Matthew was a good baby, healthy and growing well. Nora recovered quickly from the birth, and by spring she was painting again, working on a series of smaller landscapes that she could create while minding the baby. Mitchell worked steadily at the ranch, saving money and making plans. He and Nora talked often about their future, weighing options. They could stay in Hill City, where life was safe and predictable. They could move to a larger city like Denver or Santa Fe, where Nora's art might find a larger market. Or they could find somewhere new, somewhere that felt like home. The decision was made for them in an unexpected way. In March, a letter arrived from Mitchell's mother in Missouri. His brother had decided to move his family west to Oregon, and their mother was offering to sell Mitchell the family farm if he wanted it. The price was more than fair, almost a gift, and she wrote that she would like to know her grandson before she got too old. "What do you think?" Mitchell asked Nora, showing her the letter. "I think your mother misses you and wants to be part of your life, our life. But would you want to live on a farm in Missouri? It is not the wild landscapes we have been exploring. It is tame and domestic and settled." Nora considered this carefully, nursing Matthew while she thought. "I have seen the wild places now. I have painted them and experienced them, and they are part of me forever. But Matthew needs a stable home, and I would like him to grow up knowing his grandmother. And we could make the farm beautiful, Mitchell. We could build a life there that is still full of art and adventure, just in a different way." So they made the journey to Missouri that spring, traveling more slowly with an infant but managing well enough. Mitchell's mother wept when she met them, holding her grandson with trembling hands and thanking them over and over for coming. The farm was much as Mitchell remembered it, fields and woods, and a solid house that needed some work but was fundamentally sound. They settled in, and Mitchell discovered that coming back to the place he had fled was entirely different when he was coming back on his own terms, with a family he had chosen and a life he had built. He worked the land, but also continued to take guiding jobs in the spring and fall, leading people through the Missouri wilderness and occasionally further west. Nora created a studio in one of the barns and painted constantly, landscapes from memory and new works inspired by the Missouri countryside. She held exhibitions in St. Louis and Kansas City, and her work sold well. She became known for her Western landscapes, and art collectors sought out her paintings. She was commissioned to create works for banks and hotels and private homes. The money allowed them to improve the farm and save for Matthew's future. Their second child, a daughter they named Naomi, was born 2 years after Matthew. She had her mother's blue eyes and artistic temperament, drawing on any surface she could find from the time she was old enough to hold a pencil. Their third child, another son named Marcus, arrived 2 years after that, and he was like his father, more interested in the land and animals than in art or books. Mitchell's mother lived long enough to know all 3 grandchildren before passing peacefully in her sleep when Matthew was 7. They buried her on the farm, under an oak tree she had loved, and Nora painted a portrait of her from memory that they hung in the house. Life on the farm was good, full of hard work and simple pleasures, but Mitchell and Nora never forgot their traveling days. Every few years, they would take a long trip west, bringing the children with them as they grew old enough to manage the journey. They showed Matthew, Naomi, and Marcus the places Nora had first painted from imagination, the canyons and mountains and deserts that had brought their parents together. "Your mother painted these places before she ever saw them," Mitchell would tell them, standing at the rim of a canyon or the base of a mountain. "She dreamed them into being, and then I took her to see them, and we fell in love along the way." "That is so romantic," Naomi would sigh, already at age 10 showing signs of her mother's dreamy artistic nature. "It is," Nora would agree, taking Mitchell's hand. "It is romantic and real, and it happened to us." Matthew grew up to be a surveyor, combining his father's love of travel with a practical skill. He mapped territories throughout the West and sent his parents detailed letters and drawings of what he saw. Naomi became a painter like her mother, though her style was different, more impressionistic and experimental. She studied art in Chicago and New York before returning to Missouri to open a gallery that featured both her own work and her mother's. Marcus stayed on the farm, eventually taking over its operation from Mitchell, and he married a local girl who Nora painted on their wedding day. As Mitchell and Nora grew older, they traveled less but painted more. Nora worked on a series of large canvases depicting the journey they had taken together years before, a visual diary of their courtship and adventure. Mitchell would sit in her studio and watch her work, still mesmerized after decades together by the way she translated memory and feeling into paint and canvas. "You ever regret it?" she asked him once, when they were both in their 60s, gray-haired and creaky-jointed but still deeply in love. "Giving up the wandering life to settle here, not for a moment," he said honestly. "The wandering was just me looking for where I belonged. I belong with you wherever that is. The farm, the road, anywhere. You are my home, Nora." She put down her brush and came to sit beside him, taking his weathered hand in hers. "You gave me the world. You took me to see all those places I had only imagined. You made my dreams real. We made them real together," he corrected. "Everything we have, we built together." When Nora was 68, a major museum in Denver mounted a retrospective of her work, gathering paintings from across the country. Mitchell and their children made the journey west one last time for the opening. Nora stood in the galleries surrounded by a lifetime of her work, landscapes she had imagined and landscapes she had witnessed, portraits of people they had met, sketches of their children growing up. A critic from New York declared her one of the most important landscape painters of the American West, a voice that had captured a vanishing frontier with both accuracy and poetry. But what moved Nora most was not the critical acclaim or the prestigious venue. It was standing there with Mitchell's arm around her waist, their 3 grown children and 5 grandchildren scattered through the gallery, looking at the visual record of a life fully lived. Every painting was a memory, a moment frozen in time, a piece of the journey that had begun when a lonely painter met a wandering cowboy in a boarding house in South Dakota. "Thank you," she whispered to Mitchell, leaning against him, "for everything, for all of it." "Thank you for letting me take you to see the world," he whispered back. "And thank you for showing me how to really see it, through your eyes." They returned to Missouri, to the farm that had become their true home, and they lived there together for many more years. Nora painted until her hands grew too stiff to hold a brush, and even then, she would sit in her studio and simply look at her paintings, reliving the memories they held. Mitchell worked the land until his body told him to stop, and then he sat with Nora, the two of them rocking on the porch and watching the sun set over fields they had tended together for decades. Nora died first, peacefully in her sleep at age 76. Mitchell held her hand and talked to her through her last night, reminding her of all the places they had been, all the beauty they had witnessed, all the love they had shared. When she drew her last breath, he kissed her forehead and whispered, "I will see you again, my love. Wait for me." He lived for 3 more years, and his children worried about him, this strong man brought low by grief. But Mitchell was not despairing. He had had more happiness with Nora than most people found in 10 lifetimes. He had loved her and been loved by her. They had created art and children and a life together. He had taken her to see the places she had only imagined, and she had shown him how to see the beauty in everything, even the familiar fields of home. On the day he died, at age 79, he was looking at one of Nora's paintings, an early one of the canyon at sunset that he had first seen in Mrs. Henderson's boarding house so many decades before. His children found him there, a slight smile on his face as though he had just recognized something wonderful. At his funeral, they displayed Nora's paintings around the church, turning the service into a celebration of the journey the two of them had taken together. Matthew gave the eulogy, speaking of parents who had taught their children that love and adventure were not opposites but complements, that a life well lived included both wild exploration and peaceful domesticity, both impossible dreams and practical reality. The paintings they left behind hung in museums and galleries and homes across the country. Naomi wrote a book about her mother's artistic legacy and her parents' love story, illustrated with reproductions of the paintings and sketches from their travels. Marcus kept the farm in the family, and Nora's studio there became a kind of shrine, left exactly as she had kept it, brushes still in jars and a half-finished canvas on the easel. But the real legacy was not in paintings or property. It was in the story of a woman who painted places she had never been, and the cowboy who loved her enough to take her to see them all. And in doing so they found not just landscapes but each other, not just adventure but home, not just dreams but a real and lasting love that outlived them both and lived on in the hearts of those who knew them and the art they left behind. The town of Hill City, South Dakota, eventually placed a historical marker at the site of the old boarding house where Mitchell and Nora had met. It told their story in brief, factual terms, but those who stopped to read it often found themselves moved by the simple truth it conveyed. Two people had met by chance, had recognized something in each other, and had built a life around shared wonder and mutual devotion. In the hard, often harsh world of the American West in the late 1800s, such a love story was a kind of miracle, a testament to the possibility that dreams could come true and that love could endure. And in galleries and homes across the country, Nora's paintings continued to speak to new generations, images of a West that was both real and imagined, both documentary and dream. People who had never seen a canyon or a mountain could look at her work and understand what it felt like to stand in those places. People who had been there recognized the truth of her vision, the way she had captured not just the visual reality, but the emotional impact of the landscape. But those who knew the story looked at the paintings and saw something more. They saw a record of a great love, every brushstroke an act of devotion, every landscape a shared memory. They saw two lives intertwined, two separate journeys that had become one. They saw what it looked like when someone was given the chance to see their dreams made real, and when two people were brave enough to choose love and adventure over safety and convention. Mitchell Barnes and Nora Bellamy Barnes had lived and died, as all people do. But they had lived fully and loved completely, and that was its own kind of immortality. Their children and grandchildren carried their story forward, telling new generations about the painter who imagined landscapes and the cowboy who took her to see them, about the love that grew from respect and wonder and shared experience. And in that telling and retelling they lived on, forever young in the moment when they first set out from Hill City toward horizons unknown, forever joined in the adventure that had defined both their lives, forever together in the landscapes of both memory and paint. The end.